So one of the big questions that we've got is, why is it that conspiracy deniers continue to look at evidence only to a certain point and then to deny that above a certain level of corruption that might exist in their particular neighborhood or their particular locale or even in their country, they could admit to that, but they can't admit or come to terms with evidence that is increasingly overwhelming that there is corruption at all levels within global governance, within all regulatory agencies across the globe, not only in a given state or province or nation state, but in the largest nation states and in the interconnectedness with the nation states interact with one another, and most of all with corporations and other kind of institutions that are engaged in commerce, that they are engaged in massive, massive wrongdoing. So one of the curiosities about people who are otherwise intelligent and successful and informed and well-read is why at a certain point does the amount of evidence on the most important issues, why is it as if they reach some sort of a wall and that there is no going further? That sure, a story about corruption in their local police department, as we saw, or wrongdoing in the local police department or alleged wrongdoing is accepted by everybody as sort of part of the territory. That's what's going to happen. But when you start to get into corruption in a national police force like the FBI or a national intelligence agency like the CIA, why is it that some people, overtly maybe relying on patriotic issues, have a difficult time saying, well, no, it couldn't exist in those organizations, it couldn't exist in that agency because it's just too big, and that overarching agency is too important, so therefore the corruption can never exist, if so, not for very long, without being rooted out. However, it's commonplace knowledge now that in politics, the corruption is readily admitted, if not about one's own party of preference, if you have one, then certainly it is readily viewed as the opposing party is rife with corruption, wrongdoing, ill intention, sinister motives. And so why one party and not another? Why is it just one party that's up to no good, and why, made of the same kind of creatures, human beings, why the other party is somehow free of this kind of malady of doing the wrong thing and having sinister motives, when everybody agrees the evidence is very, very, very replete and available for the wrongdoing in the party of opposite choice? And why corruption in other nation states, the so-called enemy? Well, why is Russia corrupt, but somehow magically not, say, Great Britain, or not very corrupt? Why magically is China extraordinarily corrupt, but somehow remarkably not the United States? I mean, it begs the question when you've got otherwise intelligent people who seem to be ordering their lives pretty well on a local personal level, on a family level, why is it that at a certain point they don't want to hear, they don't want to see, and they don't want to know about evidence that overwhelms them personally? And that is the issue. And there was an excellent article written by journalist Tim Foyle, who commented on a plausible reason why so many otherwise bright people are vehement and sometimes even vicious conspiracy deniers when the information starts to get to a level of conspiracy that they're not comfortable with. That is, a level of conspiracy that gets too big. Too big to fail, as with the big banks in the world? Well, too big to have a conspiracy. What is it about the psychology of these people, the conspiracy deniers, not conspiracy theorists, conspiracy deniers, that allows them to take such a entrenched, unmovable view and such a mocking attitude towards people who are apparently just trying to find out the truth about what's going on? Well, the starting point that Mr. Foyle brings up in his really excellent article is that we know statistically, that is, if you believe in psychological data and research, that about 4% of people that are born have a tendency towards some kind of sociopathic personality disorder. Now, what percentage of those are true sociopaths? Let's suppose it's only 0.5%, not very many people, that's 1 in 200. And let's assume that out of that small percentage of true sociopaths that are psychopaths and dangerous people, that a certain percentage of them, based upon sort of doing research on intelligence testing, that a certain percentage of them happen to be pretty intelligent, and some of them are highly intelligent. Because what they've discovered is that sociopathy and psychopathy doesn't have anything to do with a lack or an abundance of intelligence. That people who have a moderate intelligence are just as likely to be sociopaths as extremely intelligent people. But the point is that sociopaths exist. Some of them are very capable and smart, and that we can see from reading history, which everybody seems to be pretty honest about, or has some ability to say, gosh, can you believe what some of those people did historically? That was really, really terrible how they oppressed other people, or created a system which dominated them, or enslaved them, or restricted them, or oppressed them, or took advantage of people terribly, and were terrible tyrants and evil rulers and military leaders and just awful people. Everybody seems to agree that that could have happened back then. But what about in our own day, like right now? Right at this moment? Why is it that people, again, otherwise people who have some amount of intelligence and ability and are well-read and know what's going on in the world today, the evidence is there in front of them. The evidence of wrongdoing on a massive global scale by individuals and institutions and organizations and governments, there's an abundance of it. There's no lack of it if you look. Look beyond some simple format of news media that you're getting, which is for otherwise lazy people. If you're doing any rudimentary research, you can see that something is seriously wrong with the narratives we're being presented with. So in our own time, why wouldn't there be tyrants? Why wouldn't there be evil sociopaths who have risen to the top of the pyramid structure that the world keeps apparently structuring itself on? Maybe it gets torn down in one generation briefly, and it gets replaced by yet another pyramid scheme of structural hierarchy that emerges with some different technology and some different emphasis, but it's the same thing. And some of these very bad people, a lot of these very bad people, seem to inhabit the highest reaches of power, of intrigue, and of wealth. So that keeps occurring. Everybody agrees it happened historically, but somehow now with the modern, quote, so-called secular democratic form of government, and with our new technology, massive technology of media control and of censorship ability and of weapons of mass destruction, somehow magically these people have just disappeared. Why is it that people hold to this entrenched view and they cannot believe that beyond a certain local or regional or national level, there could never be a conspiracy of wrongdoing by really bad people? What is it about their psychology? Well, Mr. Tim Doyle, who wrote the article on the psychology of conspiracy deniers, has a plausible answer. He says that, well, it begins in infancy. It begins in the earliest days of infancy, when the nursing infant is entirely dependent on its survival and well-being on the only authority figures that it knows close at hand, and that is its mother first, and sometimes an extended but very small group of adults, and usually its father. And the mother and the nursing infant, literally attached to the mother for survival at the mother's breast on the nipple, okay, transfers its trust and its reliance on its well-being, its survivability, its health and welfare onto, naturally speaking, understandably speaking, onto the mother, which is what's supposed to happen. But what happens to people psychologically, psychiatrists and psychologists are well-versed and know about this phenomena, that what happens is that same survival instinct that is attached at the mother's breast and is dependent upon the more powerful male figure, the psychology of the male protector of the infant and the family unit, that this morphs and changes throughout the infant's growing life through toddlerhood and childhood and into teenage years and then young adult years. And that is that the levels of authority are transferred ultimately from parents. We see teenagers rebelling against parents, but it may be an extended and largely imaginary peer group authority out there that is dictating to them their sense of well-being and identity. If it's not the parents, then it is authorities in school structures or in the workplace, and most especially in governmental structures. That's when we find that if there is corruption in the local or the regional or national government, people can react quite emotionally because this becomes a violation of what was earlier their dependence upon their parents. It's almost as if your mother and father have violated you, betrayed you, lied to you, stolen from you. And when that fundamental psychological position is violated in people, they can react very strongly. But what's curious with people is that survivability and well-being is core. And especially if you have no transcendent hope, as Christians, for example, have, and some other religious groups have their view on a transcendent, out of this world survivability. They are people who are confronting death and the inevitability of the extinction, at least, of this state of being that we inhabit in the body now. So in the psychology that Mr. Foyle presents related to conspiracy deniers, what is it about their psychology that is different? Well, he would allege that it never matured beyond this ultra-dependent need for an authority figure like the mother with her breast and nipple, with the father with his strong biceps and his holding, comforting arms, and that this transfer psychologically has, with many people who are otherwise quite normal and very successful, or in other ways they are ordinary people or even extraordinary people, that this particular element of them has never grown up. They don't actually have a mature, self-identified, and self-possessed view of the world, of reality, or of their ultimate well-being. And therefore, in that kind of psychology, the ability for wrongdoing to occur beyond a certain level for them, and the level can vary with them, simply stops as a possibility. It's like trying to tell a child that their parent is an abuser. It's like trying to tell a very young child that their mother is trying to harm them. Children don't want to believe that. That's why it's very hard with abused children sometimes to bring them out of that kind of environment. It's why it's very hard sometimes to take girls who have been trafficked, or boys, at a very young age, and who have been abused by people who have become that father and mother figure in their life and are their protector and their abuser and their harmer and exploiter all at the same. Well, for those people who are quite frankly grown up and mature, it appears that we are in an abusive system, and that our abusers are also playing on that same understanding of human nature and psychology that many people who are otherwise grown up at a most fundamental level of owning their own worldview and their own faith, and owning and self-possessing their own trust in an authority figure that goes beyond just the human level, that person is rarer than the majority. And that's why there's so many people that are conspiracy deniers. They need a human layer. They want a temporal, this world layer of security, protection of a father and mother figure. They want to stay connected to the breast. Now, the truth and the reality is that we're all headed to extinction. And unless you're an unusual person, and maybe not a very well person, nobody looks forward to that experience. But for Christian people, for religious people, the reason that we don't put our hope ultimately in the state is because it is a human construct and a human institution, no matter what form it operates under, whether it's a democracy, a republic, a constitutional monarchy, or fill in the blank. Presently, the evidence is overwhelming that while there are various forms of government that exist in the world, most of them being some format of a secular representative government, a democracy, a republic, elected officials who represent the people. The truth of the matter is that the power lies incontrovertibly, based upon evidence, as it does normally, with an oligarchy. And that in this oligarchy, the majority are very unwell and very abusive and very ruthless and very vicious people, whether they occupy governmental sectors or commercial sectors or money interest sectors or military sectors or intelligence agency sectors. Those are the key areas that have to be occupied to have essential control of a nation state or a collection of nation states. Total control is not required. Some sort of imaginary idea from almost 100 years ago of the way that governments or those that were behind governments were trying to order control. This is over 100 years old or longer, or even further back if you look at certain forms of aristocracy or monarchy. So what we're talking about is how technologically control is exercised today. And we know that it can be controlled by essentially controlling certain things. You don't have to control all things. The psychology that's played upon, apart from the need to belong, the need to not be fringe, the need to be accepted in the center and to have your character and your work and your family and your individuality affirmed by the largest number of people possible, are all reasons why people are conspiracy deniers in the face of overt evidence that massive wrongdoing has occurred not just a long time ago by some really bad guys or gals, but that is occurring in real time right now by very powerful and very sick people, and by institutions they've created or that they've taken over. The evidence is overwhelming. And yet, the reason that people deny this is because they have never, at the most fundamental level, at least says Mr. Foyle and others who would agree with him, like me, that they have at the most essential level, they have never grown up. They may look grown up, and they may be in certain ways grown up, but at the most fundamental level of facing the existential threat of death, coming to terms with the most ultimate questions of life, like is there a God, is there a hereafter, is there a life after this, is there judgment, is there possible punishment for the life I've lived, and also is there something beyond just the human level of human institutions, human constructs that I can appeal to as an individual or we as a group? Is there any such level of authority? Or is it simply agnostic and empty out there? Can I not know? In short, if we don't put our faith and trust in a God or in some understanding of a God, then we're inevitably going to put our faith and trust in something much lesser, something human. And we're never going to grow up, especially if we never look at those facts about ourselves and recognize that we have not detached from this infantile need for human security at a very basic level. We've just transferred it from mom or mommy, and we've put it onto the state. And if our own state is not acceptable, then we put it onto a transnational movement of international workers, or an international socialist movement, or an international commercial movement of global corporations, or an international assortment of non-government organizations and foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And somehow magically, these organizations, peopled by human beings like us, will never ever be threatened by the dogged consistency of evil, fallen, imperfect, sociopathic, capable, competent psychopaths to rise to the top. That just can't happen. It could have happened in the past, but somehow magically, for some reason, it can't happen now. And we really can't explain to you why it can't happen, but you know what? We need it to be like we're telling you. We need it to be like that because our survival depends on it.